Hi, this is Vince Fahori Horn, here for another episode of Buddhist Geeks. And today this is a bit of a monologue in that I'm going to just share a bit and talk a bit about some recent jhana drama that I've gotten involved in. And I want to talk about it not just from my personal perspective, but why I think this is an important topic for all people who are engaged in the practices of meditation, contemplation that are influenced by and inspired by the Buddhist tradition. So let me bring you back several months ago to early part of this year in January 2024. I was invited by Stephen Zerfes, the CEO and one of the founders, I'm not sure, of Jhāna, Journey. Journey is a technology startup that is attempting to build technology that helps accelerate the process of learning the jhanas. So, a topic, that we've been covering and exploring and sharing and doing stuff around for many years here in Buddhist Geeks. If you've been paying attention, you'll know this is like kind of our wheelhouse. So, of course, when I was invited to come and attend a retreat that they were leading online, that they just, I think, started recently leading retreats, to give them feedback and to observe their teaching methods. I was initially excited about this prospect, but also felt a little weird because these are people that I don't know. I don't know their background. I don't know their training. I got a sense that they weren't that experienced as practitioners, so I did find it a little strange that they were leading retreats, to be completely honest with you, because in my training, my background is in the insight meditation tradition. My wife completed the 4-year retreat teacher training that was put on by Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein, etc. So, in my world, in the world that I trained up in, leading retreats was considered sort of the pinnacle of training, in part because it's a retreat model of practice, but also because when you go on retreat and you're doing intensive practice for several days or weeks at a time, or months, it's really important to have good guidance. And this becomes clear if you just take a look at the difference between, say, a retreat center like the Insight Meditation Society or Spirit Rock Meditation Center. These are big insight meditation centers run by, I'd say, very qualified teachers, people that have a lot of experience. They've done usually, if not several months, several years of retreat practice. And they've gotten good training because retreat environments are very intensive. It's like doing a psychedelic trip. You need good guidance and good support and loving presence in order to have that intensity be transmuted into growth and insight rather than into breaking down and having a mental health emergency or crisis. And if you look at the Goenka tradition of retreat, which is extremely popular, the incidences of serious mental health issues that come out of those retreats are very high. In fact, I just finished working with someone one-on-one. I was coaching someone who reached out who was having a serious mental health crisis recently on the back of a Goenka retreat. So this is real. This is very real. Very small minority of people on retreat will have very difficult and intense material come up. I've seen it while teaching retreats. And you want some training and be able to deal with that intensity. So going into this experience, I thought, this might be a little weird. I haven't trained these people. I don't know their background. I get the sense that they're little experienced, but it's good that they're reaching out and looking for advice. So because I'm interested in this area, in this field, and I want to see what they're working on, and I want to see if I can get behind this team, I agreed to come and participate as a kind of expert observer / giving feedback. I also taught one session within that retreat and shared some social out loud multiplayer meditation practices with the group, specifically a technique called jhana noting. So this is the background for the jhana drama. So I go and I do this thing, and I sit in on some private interviews in which Stephen and one of his colleagues is basically doing a dual interview with folks as they come through. And I'm just basically listening and offering them a very small amount, like 1 minute of feedback after each 15-minute interview, and really just taking it in and kind of seeing how they're doing things. A few things become clear to me. Like, one is, I just want to say this up front. I don't think these people are terrible people. This is not where I'm coming from. I don't think they are personally psychopaths or extremely bad people. I think they are actually sincere for where they are. But where they are is they're very early on the path of their own personal development around these topics. They are in the early intermediate stages of practice in which you're still a hyper evangelical. It's a very normal thing when you first get into something to get all about it and to want to share it with everyone and think it is the ultimate thing, the panacea to end all pain. Understandably, that's where they are, but not everyone in that stage is also starting a company on the back of it without much awareness of the potential downsides of how they're going about it, i.e., teaching retreats without much practice experience. When I ask them, how much experience do you have? What is the basis of your qualification to lead these retreats? They told me they had done more than 100 hours of practice. And that was the basis, the logic upon which they decided that they were qualified to teach. So for me, this is a little shocking because I'm like, okay, so when I was invited to do the Insight Meditation teacher training, at that point I had logged a year of retreat. And that was a lot less than my teachers had done. Okay, so I'm fine with the standards changing, but to go from, months and months and months, thousands and thousands of hours of practice to 100 hours is sufficient with no formal training. To me, it's an unreasonable change in what we expect from people who are caring for and responsible for the mental health of other people during a retreat. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. It's just not enough training to be able to sufficiently deal with the shit that's going to come up because they don't know what they're doing, just on a basic level. That was my first red flag. That was my first okay, fuck, what's going on here? The second thing that I really just want to raise, because these issues I think affect anyone who's considering going and doing one of these journey retreats. My recommendation, based on what I've seen in January and based on the conversations I've had since then with people, I would say don't go on those retreats unless you have your own support network. You have psychological professional that you can reach out to that will respond to you immediately. If you have support, go for it. If you don't have support, you're rolling the dice. If you have a really bad experience, these people do not have the competency to be able to address it. So that's the danger. That's a dangerous point. And the same would go with Goenka retreats. I don't recommend those. Just based on my experience of being in retreat and having intense stuff come up and having someone I can talk to who really understands what's going on, who has more experience than me, a lot more. And I found that to be invaluable during these intensive periods of practice. So this is important. The second thing that I want to mention here and that I've taken issue with, it's caused some Jhāna drama, especially as I've talked about this on X/Twitter, is that when I was participating in this expert observer feedback role, I also took note of the method that they're teaching. So here's the thing. If you want to build a headset or some kind of psychotechnology that reads your brain waves and gives you feedback and tells you how close you are to jhana or not, even if they're able to do that in the future, and from what I can tell, no one has been able to do this yet. This is all hype and hope, not actual technology that's been developed, right? So at this point, they're trying to develop this technology and they're using these test beds, these retreats as test beds to do that and to build an early community. All of that is fine, again, and would be fine if there was someone at the helm of these retreats who was qualified to teach. But here's another issue, is that they have taken a meditation method called TWIM. From what I can tell is a dead Theravada monk named Bhante Vimalaramsi. And he developed this method, which I hadn't heard of, called TWIM. It's becoming somewhat, popular-ish now. It's basically a type of metta practice, and it uses a kind of teaching technique in which you remember several things. They call them the 6 R's. Reminds me of the RAIN method in insight meditation: recognize, accept, investigate, and non-identify or nurture. It's an acronym practice like that helps you kind of remember several points and just you keep tuning back into them. So it's a method for developing jhana or concentration that uses metta. It's the first time I was exposed to it. I saw them teaching it. I gave them some feedback on it. I thought it was a kind of clunky, and I didn't think it was a great method, to be honest with you. As I saw it in action, I was like, okay, I've seen a lot, I think, techniques that I think would be more effective for what they're trying to do. I gave them that feedback. But then as I looked into the technique afterwards and I tried to understand more about it, I realized very quickly there's no way that this monk could have given these guys permission to teach this method, to authorize them in his approach. So I confirmed that. I talked to someone who has practiced within that. I'm not going to name this person, but they practice within that tradition, the Twim tradition with Bhante Vimalamsi and people that have come after, and they're friends with the Journey founders and folks. And I asked them, like, hey, have they trained with this person? Oh, they did a little training. They maybe did a retreat or something. They're authorized to teach it? No, of course not. It's hard to get authorized to teach things in a Buddhist context. And why? Well, some of it is gatekeeping. Let's be honest. This is part of the logic that the Journey folks have, is we're going to take the gatekeepers down and make all this accessible to everyone. Okay, we'll get into that argument and whether or not that actually would be good, the McJhānification of jhana. But let's acknowledge, yes, there are gatekeepers, there are people that make it very hard to use their cultural templates. That you have to jump through a lot of hoops and do a lot of training and potentially go through some political bullshit to become, a lineage holder. Okay, I know this because I am a fucking lineage holder. Okay, I know that this shit is crazy. And part of the reason I went through the hassle of becoming a lineage holder is because for me, it feels like the only way to really innovate in a contemplative tradition is to innovate from inside of it rather than to be on the outside grabbing parts of it and using them. Why? Well, because this is basic cultural appropriation, folks. What is cultural appropriation? It's profiting off of something that wasn't freely given to you. If you're part of a lineage where there's been person after person with each generation who is literally out loud saying, I am freely giving you permission to carry forward this Dharma tradition, they are also telling you, I'm giving you permission to change it. That's part of what it means. It's not just to preserve it, it's to adapt it as well. If you haven't received that permission from people inside the tradition, it's because they don't think you know what the tradition is. And if you don't know what it is, how can you make those choices wisely about what to use and what to adapt and what to innovate, what to mix, etc.? You can't really. That's the idea. So there are gatekeepers for that very reason, because this is a cultural legacy. It's a knowledge base of information and wisdom carried forward not just through texts, but also through human beings and personal relationships. And that's important to understand. That's the Buddhist perspective on this. When mindfulness was secularized, and this started happening well before I started my own practice, but I had a front row seat along with my partner Emily, a front row seat in seeing the mindfulness movement emerge, because we were practicing at the same centers that the teachers, Jon Kabat-Zinn, our own teacher, Trudy Goodman, others trained at, that ended up being the primary ones who secularized mindfulness, okay? So we saw this happen. We saw mindfulness make the jump, the leap from insight meditation over and become a popular, secularized approach. You have to keep in mind, this was being done by people who had deep experience in the tradition, who were part of it. They were inside of it. Jon Kabat-Zinn had been doing many years of practice with lots of teachers across multiple Buddhist traditions before he developed MBSR. So even if we take mindfulness as a template and we say, hey, it's possible to take jhana and to extract it and unbundle it from the tradition and be able to offer it on a much wider, more secularized basis. Of course, then you'd be able to build businesses around it, right? Look at the number of meditation app businesses, of billion-dollar businesses that have been built on the backs of the secularization of mindfulness. So yeah, of course, there's an opportunity there. But who's the opportunity for? I'd argue here the opportunity is not for people who are in the early stages of their own journey with this stuff and who don't quite understand it yet, or not understand to the depth that would be required to truly innovate. This is one of the issues here. And it's the cultural appropriation and theft of knowledge coming out of the Buddhist tradition that I take issue with. When you steal an old dead monk's meditation method, that ain't good business. That's not ethical, right? Just think about it. Is that ethical? No, it's not. If you think it is, I'm sorry, but you're lost in the modern narrative about how it doesn't matter who you take stuff from. It's free. The air is free. Oh yeah, the air is free. That's why we've almost completely destroyed our air quality, because that's how we look at it. Oh, it's free. It doesn't belong to anyone. Well, that's why we can take and justify the taking of people's land. As a Palestinian American, I know this logic is bullshit. No, everything is not just free. You can't just take whatever you want. That's not how this works. If you do, there are consequences for that. And one of the potential consequences here that I see of trying to scale up jhana using technology to amplify that, using AI and all the advanced technologies we have to amplify that secularization and that unbundling, to do that without a deep knowledge of what it is that you're scaling up. To have not scaled deep before you scale wide. It's an ethical dilemma. That's going to lead to bad results. It just is. It's just going to lead to some bad results. And those bad results, which might not be that bad, are going to be amplified by whatever scale they're operating at. This is the negative externality of this kind of startup. And where I see the most danger here is in the difficult stages of the contemplative path that arise even with very little practice, let alone with a powerful psychotechnology. Assuming they were able somehow to develop this tech, let's say, and be the first movers in the space, and say they become the size of Headspace or Calm, Journey does. They're going to scale up all of that ignorance. And unfortunately, the impact of that would likely be a lot of people who have mental health issues. So these are the kinds of things, like if you're starting a company in this space and you're not talking about these things a lot, and you're not aware of all the conversations and the debates that have happened throughout the mindfulness movement, you just come in thinking standard Silicon Valley business entrepreneurship logic, like, oh, I can just move fast and break things. I'm sorry, folks, like that doesn't work anymore. And when it's happening within the very tradition and space that I cared so deeply about, a lot of people I know going on these journey retreats, I think it's a problem. So I want to highlight that. And I want to also highlight that it's a fixable problem. These are things that could be fixed. I'm not condemning journey forever. I'm just saying, as someone who is invited as an expert to observe their processes and give them feedback, these are the issues that I have. And I take issue not only with the potential danger of scaling these technologies up, but I take issue with the way that they're going to scale them up. They already have figured out, yes, if you just say bliss, 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 everyone come and get the bliss, that is a decent marketing approach. Everyone does want to feel better, and understandably. So if you just say, hey, we can make you feel better, here's the thing that'll make you feel better, that will work to bring people in. And that's why I think there is a lot of hype going on around jhana right now. But the impact of setting up a marketing approach like that, and of getting everyone to be evangelists for you and go out and spread the good word about how you can come on a retreat and experience good stuff. Yeah, of course, you're going to do that. Most people are going to have a good time on retreat, even if it's organized by an AI bot. You'd have a good retreat, most people, because it's just dedicating space and time to practice and be with other people who are practicing. That's good. Great. It's a more sort of decentralized retreat model? No, because it's centralized and it's being run by people that, again, don't really know what they're doing, and they're using stolen psychotechnology. We are in a jhana hype bubble right now. And I know that because I saw, when I first started getting into jhana few years after, there was a jhana hype cycle in the mid-aughts. And this one was a bit different. I don't think it's quite spilled out into popular culture in the way that this current hype cycle is. But there was a huge surge of interest, a huge number of books that were published by American Dharma teachers. Lee Brasington at that point, who's the first jhana teacher I practiced with, published something. Shayla Catherine was publishing books. I talked to a number of people on Buddhist Geeks, Richard Shankman, B. Alan Wallace, Tina Rasmussen, Stephen Snyder, others that were really deep jhana teachers, American, usually Western jhana teachers, translating the depth of what they'd learned, often with their Asian teachers, to the West. That was the wave that I experienced. And that wave was very profound to me. I got super into jhana. I was a jhana hype man. I wasn't teaching at that point because honestly, I had much higher standards than these guys too about when I started teaching. But I was super into it, and through Buddhist Geeks, amplified jhana practice a lot. It was very interesting that the hype cycle, the hypes came and went, and this one too will come and go. And I understand that everyone is excited right now. And I think some of the jhana hype that's building has people excited about potential companies that could arise out of that space, because there is something there. And jhana probably will be secularized in the same way that lots of other things will be secularized that come out of the Buddhist tradition that have yet to be. I'm not opposed to secularization. I'm opposed to cultural appropriation, and I'm opposed to incompetency and putting people's mental health at risk. So that's the issue. Could jhana be secularized well or more wisely? Yeah, I think so. In fact, I'd love to point out the work that I've recently become aware of through my friend Daniel Ingram, the work of Matthew Sackett, who is a scientist operating at Harvard, and he's also at Massachusetts General Hospital. And he's the director of their meditation research program. And he's been doing work exploring these kinds of things with really great equipment, and is interested in deepening the science of deep meditation, including jhana. He's co-authored pieces on the scientific exploration of really esoteric meditation attainments like Nirodha Samapatti, for those that are familiar with that. And this to me is a much better approach of starting with the science first, so going deep on the science side, before you create new kinds of technologies, which are basically applied science. And part of what Matthew's doing, and part of the benefit of the academic approach, is like you get to study it in a very controlled environment with a small number of people for a while before you try to scale that up. And that, I think, is a much more ethical approach to the development of these technologies. I hope to see jhana tech that emerges out of laboratories like this rather than from people that just really, again, don't have the grounding to do that. And I also point out that part of the mission that Matthew shared with me is a general educational mission of wanting to educate people on the potential downsides of engaging with these practices. From my point of view, Matthew's engaged in what I would call a second generation mindfulness project. There's an article I wrote, I'll link to in the show notes here, on second generation mindfulness. Second generation mindfulness is really just the next wave of secular meditation style projects who are taking into account the first generation critiques, the critiques of the first generation of mindfulness, things like McMindfulness, the watering down of mindfulness, or the removing of mindfulness from its liberative and ethical frameworks. That's McMindfulness. There's also the issue of hypercapitalism that first generation of mindfulness was definitely criticized with, of like you're taking this great psychotechnology and you're using it to improve the lives of people who are operating in a toxic work environment, for instance. And these are valid critiques. These are things that if you don't account for, you'll just repeat the mistakes and the problems, right? So second generation mindfulness projects, like what I heard from what Matthew is doing in his lab, these projects attempt to integrate some of that feedback and some of those critiques. And so part of how Matthew's doing that, and the critique he's responding to here, is the danger of introducing meditation as a panacea, thinking mindfulness is going to cure all. It's not John Kabat-Zinn said mindfulness will cure everything. He never said that. It's just the way that it ended up being marketed and the way that people ended up thinking about it and how it was presented in the press, etc. It had that vibe, that panacea vibe. So that was a real problem because people go into this thinking, oh, this can't hurt me. And then suddenly they find themselves having a mental health and existential crisis. In the worst case, being hospitalized. That happens. So Matthew is trying to educate the public, and any second generation mindfulness project I think would do this, try to educate the public on the potential downsides and give people avenues to get support if they need it. So this is something that I think the Journey Project needs to integrate if they want to be a viable second generation project. You've got to have some way to frame this stuff, not in terms of being a panacea, but like a more nuanced and honest view. My teacher, Daniel Ingram, said these practices should come with a warning label. Where's the warning label? There isn't one, because when people are engaged in unadulterated just sales, they just want to get people to use their product. That creates friction from a business standpoint. You don't want to warn people about the side effects of your thing. Legally, pharmaceutical drugs, they have to. You've ever seen a pharmaceutical drug commercial, at the end you hear this huge long list of warnings. Well, we don't have that for meditative psychotechnologies, but we should. And the people that are responsible are the ones that are going to add that. Okay, so what Matthew's doing, I'd point out, is very different. Also, at the end of this whole experience with the jhana journey, guys, that it inspired me. I was sitting back just feeling kind of upset about this whole thing and critical, as I've shared. And I thought, well, shit, I am going to be critical. I am going to warn folks. I don't think these retreats are safe. I'm going to point out these issues in the hope that they address them and improve. And I'm going to try to do something that's, I think, better and that responds to the issues that I see. So I started the jhana.community on the heels of this experience with Journey because I wanted to offer something that I think is better instead of just being critical. So there are projects out there and there are teachers who you can go to and get very deep instruction from. I'd recommend anybody who's studied deeply and trained with Rob Berbea, with Lee Brazington, any of the teachers that I mentioned before. There are lots of folks who teach jhana in a context that is safe and that isn't hyper dogmatic. I think that's one of the concerns I saw is that, oh, well, all these places where you can train in jhana are really dogmatic. No, that's not true. There are lots of teachers out there and approaches who are not dogmatic. Like, yes, you might be practicing within a Buddhist context and not a completely secularized jhana context. To me, that's an upside because you've got the additional context and history. There aren't any good secular jhana places, and even what the Journey folks are doing is not really completely secularized. There's a lot of Buddhist references in the retreat, or was. But there are good communities and good teachers out there. They're very accessible. So by all means, find, if you're interested in jhana, you can do that. To me, that's not really the question. The question is just, who are we learning from and what are we supporting in the process? In the jhana community, we're focused on small group learning, and I am part of the feedback loop there as someone who's been practicing and training and teaching jhana for now 14 years. I've been teaching it, practicing it for more than 20. So that's a very different environment, and you're going to get a lot different kinds of feedback and support. And we're not trying to build a psychotechnology that we can scale up to everyone. We're trying to build a small community where everyone could actually know each other and where there's access to good support and instruction and a real sense of community. So this is a different kind of project. It's not trying to scale wide. It's trying to scale deep. And to me, that is the most interesting thing in the jhana world. And I hope, if someone does secularize this stuff and create a psychotechnology that leads to a bunch of people having mental health issues, I hope they'll be able to find these communities still and find their way into a safer environment. But unfortunately, there's going to be a lot of negative externalities from that. And that's the reason I can't support it, and I don't support it. I think we have to be really wise with how we scale up these things. And I'm not seeing evidence at the moment that Journey is applying that kind of wisdom to their project. And it's unfortunate because they've got quite a bit of early momentum. and they've convinced a lot of people that they know what they're doing. So fine, fair enough. I'm not convinced unless they demonstrate an ability to respond to these concerns. And I'm not being paid anymore as a consultant by them, but here's some advice for them or anyone else who wants to go about this project. One option you could do is you could bring in someone onto your team, ideally give them some real equity so they feel invested in the project, who is qualified. Have that person be leading the retreats. Have that person be leading the innovative pedagogy side of the teaching, because you have to still have a method to get people into jhana, even if you have technology that helps with it. There's still methods. There's still technique. So hire someone, bring someone on your team who has that competency and skill. That addresses my first two issues. If they are also a lineage holder, addresses the cultural appropriation issue. You have someone on your team who is a legitimate innovator with coming from within the tradition. You don't have to deal with these criticisms anymore. For me, you might still deal with them for more extremely conservative Buddhists, but fine. At some point, you have to piss someone off. Understood. The second thing you could do is you could just stop using the term jhana. The term jhana, of course, it doesn't belong to Buddhism. Jhana is pre-Buddhist. It's an Indian psychotechnology that the Buddha adopted and integrated into his approach. But the type of jhana that they're talking about and teaching is very much intertwined with the Buddhist tradition. All of the main influences they're pulling from, they're not Hindu, they're Buddhist. And they're specifically American Buddhist or Western Buddhists. So it's that word jhana is inextricably entwined with the Buddhist tradition right now. You could stop calling it jhana and call it something else. Come up with your own language and modeling to describe whatever you think is universal there and teach that. Now, I don't expect that to happen because I think the early momentum this group has gotten has been all around usage of the term jhana. And why? Because you're taking some esoteric thing and you're selling it, you're repackaging it and selling it. What people are attracted to is the authenticity of the esoteric thing. That's what you're selling. Or in this case, stealing and reselling. So that's one you could approach it that way. And I think that would be good because that would force them to actually innovate, to actually come up with their own language and models, and to see how difficult that actually is. You have to deeply understand the thing that you're translating to translate it well. That would be more honest to me. The third thing I think they could do is they could actually go and get the training that I'm talking about. They could go put the months and years in of practice and get some formal training from people who actually know what they're doing, and then be able to do what they're doing, but from the place of competency. I think that's unlikely as well because that would slow them down quite a bit. But, just saying, that would address these issues as well. So I want to leave this with a few suggestions. It's not that Journey's a hopeless project. It's just right now how they're doing business, it's not one I can support. And I, again, like I said, recommend you avoid them until they address these issues. But they could. They totally could address these issues. You can also check out the Jhāna community if you want a non-dogmatic approach to learning jhana that's coming from a place of open experimentation and deep respect and honor of the traditions that these things come from. Thank you for taking the time to tune into a bit to this jhana drama. If you've listened this long, well, congratulations. Thank you for taking the time. And in closing, I just want to say, I do really hope that we're able to much more wisely navigate the secularization of jhana than we have the secularization of mindfulness. We can learn from what happened then and do it better. And right now, again, I'm not seeing that learning taking place. And I really hope to, with the projects that come out of the second generation, that they actually have learned from the first generation. But to learn from the first generation, you have to respect and honor the history and the causal lineage of these things. That's the only way you can really learn from the mistakes of the past, is to understand the past. And so that's the invitation here, I think, is to more deeply respect and honor the well from which these innovations are arising, so that whoever decides to and is able to share them more broadly can do that in a way that reduces the negative externalities and potentially even funnels people into deeper communities of practice, so that for those that go deeper, it's an easy pathway. And for those that have difficulties, that they have the support that they need, that they don't just spiral off into a mental health crisis. May this be so. May jhana spread wisely and safely and be accessible to all beings. After nearly a year in private beta, the Buddhist Geeks Network is now open for any independent practitioners who want to engage in interdependent practice. You can find out more about the Buddhist Geeks Network by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. And if you'd like to join the community and join us in regular social meditation practice or other events that we host there in the network, all freely offered, you're very welcome to do so, again, by visiting buddhistgeeks.network. Love to see you there.